Шановні друзі, ми раді вітати вас на черговій зустрічі, які організовує фонд «Відкрий Україну», фонд Арсенія Яценюка, і в рамках нашого проєкту «Відкрий світ» Open World. Як ви знаєте, під час зустрічі даного проєкту ми проводимо діалог переважно з відомими політиками, експертами по темах, які є надзвичайно актуальними для нашого суспільства. І сьогодні дуже важлива тема, оскільки ми поговоримо про українсько-американські відносини. Якими вони зараз мають бути, що означають вибори, президентські вибори в Штатах для України і україно-американських відносин, для відносин Сполучені Штати Європа, і які це наслідки матиме для України. І про все це ми будемо говорити сьогодні. І в нас дуже цікаві гості, оскільки, як ви пам'ятаєте, ми зустрічі проводимо англійською мовою, проте, якщо ви відчуваєте, що ваша англійська недостатня для завдання запитань, то ви можете говорити українською, і ми допоможемо з перекладом, і, в принципі, наші гості розуміють українську мову. І я би хотів, now I come to English, and I would like shortly to introduce our very interesting guests for this evening. So we have Mr. Andraan Karatnicький, who is Senior Research Fellow at Atlantic Council, and who is also leading one of the Atlantic Council initiatives is Dialog Ukraina-West, and who is also a member of board of NGO Ukrainian-Jewish meetings. Yes. Encounter. And please welcome our guest. And also we have Pítер Залмаєв, who is director of New York-based Eurasia Democratic Initiative. I believe Peter will tell more about your institution and what we are doing here in Ukraine. And one more guest we have here for today is Vlad Davidson. Vlad is a correspondent and scientist dealing with the sphere of human rights. So, as usual, our guests have some time for their introductory speech, and after that, we encourage communication with you, questions, whatever you're interested in, comments from your side are highly welcomed, because our meetings are usually done in the form of discussion. It's open and free discussion. So I hope that you will have a nice evening today, and if you give any questions and you wanted to speak, our colleagues Alina, she's missing at the moment. She's coming right now. She has microphone. Please raise your hand, and you will get microphone for everybody to hear you. So we are starting our evening.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. I think that I'd like to begin with a kind of a broad overview, one that may, while you will be disturbed by some of the things that have already been said, and probably disturbed by some of the things that my colleagues will subsequently say, in my prefatory remarks, I would like to lower your level of concern by trying to explain why I think that because the United States is a system of institutions and of continuities, that in my view, we should not fear a grand disruption of those continuities by the election of a non-systemic outsider as president of the United States in the form of Donald Trump. So let me begin in the beginning that in my view, Trump is not a Republican president, and what the United States is facing is a kind of a curious form of cohabitation, a kind of an interesting mix where the president of the country comes from a different ideological paradigm and set of principles than has been the traditional consensus of either the Republican or the Democratic Party. He is a hybrid of certain sentiments that are outside of the realm of traditional conservatism and economic free market thought, which has been the continuity of Republican thinking since the the advent of the Reagan years, and the preamble of which was felt in the candidacy in 1964 of Senator Goldwater, who was the first important representative of a kind of traditionalism, cultural conservatism, and liberalism. He is equally, and which found its apogee in the form of the presidency of Ronald Reagan. That republicanism was free market oriented, supported low taxation, supported traditional values but not cultural values, where cultural values were not at the center of its messaging, was open in terms of borders for the flow of immigrants, was open in terms of free trade or lowering of barriers to trade, and was very self-confident in the strength of America and its ability to operate within this kind of a system. Mr. Trump does not really come from that tradition. He carries elements of that tradition in his views, and he also is different from the traditional Republican conservative post-Cold War era in that he has elements of isolationism, but also elements of support for strong, muscular foreign policy, strong, I would say, buildup of the military and the like. So the other characteristics that are not symptomatic of the Republican Party are his interest in breaking with certain free trade agreements and free trade understandings and lower tariffs, which he views are injurious to the American interest and to the interests of primarily what would be called the increasingly shrinking American industrial working class. His suspicion of immigration, his lack of confidence in not in the greatness of America, but in the current greatness of America. In other words, he is the first, I would say, Republican to run in a long time that has evoked very dark and non-optimistic views of where the country is and where the country is likely to be headed to. As a result, the idea that he is a president that will comfortably realize his agendas in foreign policy and domestic policy, in immigration policy, is fundamentally questionable. And that is why I believe there will be a great deal of inertia, institutional inertia, which we already are seeing, policy resistance on the part of some of the agendas that he seeks to put forward. And we see it already in a range of foreign policy issues, which I think are of greatest interest to you. If you follow the U.S. discourse on President Trump's policies in recent weeks, you will notice a phenomenon that an increasing number, primarily not simply of his campaign opponents like Senators Rubio, Cruz, Graham, and his critics during the campaign like Senator McCain, are critical of his positions on certain foreign policy and domestic policy issues. But you see a rising scolding, a mild scolding and setting of parameters by key Republican senators, Senator Corker, who heads the important Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Mitch McConnell, the majority leader of the U.S. Senate. To this chorus of voices, a number of additional Republicans can be heard, including senators from the state of Texas, which currently is concerned about the disruptions of its relatively smooth economic links with Mexico and the interdependency of Texas on Mexico trade, which is probably no lesser than was the counter trade between Russia and, say, the Donbas region of Ukraine before the current Russian occupation and the like. Let's talk about these institutions. So number one, I think Mr. Trump will face and increasingly will be facing markers that will mark where his party will not go with him. And many of his favorite agenda items, like building a wall with Mexico, will meet with resistance because of the cost. And will meet with resistance even with his plan that it should be funded on raising tariffs with Mexico, because tariffs are viewed by a very large portion of his Republican fellow legislators as a tax that will simply be imposed on the American public and incompatible with the low tax policies that Republicans traditionally follow. By contrast, he will be strongly supported in his efforts to lower corporate tax rates, and as you probably can see or follow the markets in the United States, they have been rising steadily since the Trump election and inauguration, primarily because he offers deep tax cuts into on corporate earnings, on corporate profits. Another place where he will face resistance, which is germane to Ukraine, is on the issue of Russia. There are a number of legislative proposals that will that are proposed that, if enacted, would severely constrain his ability to remove sanctions and might compel him to do certain things in the form of active support and assistance to Ukraine should he choose to depart from that consensus. In supporting this kind of constraint, it's important to remember the history of United States post-war foreign policy. Until the beginnings of the Cold War, the United States mainly conducted major wars and military operations based on declarations of war by the United States Congress. In the complex context of the Cold War, more and more prerogatives were ceded by tradition and understanding, but not by constitutional provision, to the president, including legislation like the War Powers Act, which gave him greater flexibility to deploy U.S. troops. Now, I'm not suggesting that those responsibilities will immediately be lifted from him, but the Congress can consider substantially limiting, if it has lack of confidence in the foreign policy prerogatives of the chief executive of the United States, has the ability to constrain him through legislation that compels him to behave in a certain way, allocates money, maintains sanctions. Of course, he can use the power of veto, but here we have a very interesting development that the normally more, I would say, dovish viewpoints of the Democratic Party have been radicalized by the rather powerful intervention of the Russian security services in hacking and attacking and corrupting, attempting to corrupt the U.S. Political process, which has turned almost to a woman and man every senator and congressman from the Democratic Party into very active opponents of President and critics of President Putin. To this, if you add Republicans who will be looking at the polls in just in a little less than a year and a half's time, thinking about their election to the House of Representatives every 2 years and 1/3 of the Senate, I think you will see there will be a level of concern if Mr. Trump's ratings are not good. And the most objective ratings that have been done by non-politicized polling organizations show him to have the lowest popularity rating of any president in the first 100 days of his administration since, in the post-war era, since polling has been taken in that minute and regular way. He is, at the current Gallup polling, has about 40% approval, a substantial erosion from the 47 or 48% of his vote, and also the 48% of his electoral of his vote in the presidential election, and not much higher than his traditional core of support, which was hovering at 30 to 35% during the time of his primary run. What this means is that Republicans looking at a person who has a 40% rating, popularity support rating and 53-54% negative rating have some degree of urgency, particularly in districts where incumbents don't have very wide margins. And I think that they will be increasingly departing from him if they see him to be politically weak and his public support to be weak. So all of these factors together are constraining him and will constrain him should he depart from the overwhelming consensus of the U.S. foreign policy establishment and of the I would say of the political party legislative members of the members of Congress and of the Senate. So I can say that I'm drawn to the conclusion optimistically that either Mr. Trump will and then you have the factor of the resignation of the National Security Advisor, Mr. Flynn, General Flynn. You have the factor that you have some hawks like the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Mattis, and you have, I think, the beginnings of a discussion about repopulating the National Security Council with more technocratic and professional voices. We will see how the State Department senior positions are filled, and they've not yet been filled. Mr. Trump vetoed the first nominee to be the Deputy Secretary of State, Elliot Abrams, because Mr. Abrams had written articles critical of Mr. Trump during the campaign, even though he was put forward by the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. At the same time, there are names like floated around like Paula Dobriansky, a colleague of mine at the Atlantic Council, who is of Ukrainian American of Ukrainian origin, a frequent visitor to Kiev, and a person who is regarded as a sort of a representative of the foreign policy establishment. There is a discussion that either General Petraeus, again, who has worked closely with us at the Atlantic Council and was a very early advocate of lethal military assistance to Ukraine, is one of the key candidates for the top National Security Council post to replace General Flynn, and Steve Hadley, who is, again, an old hand in the sober Republican establishment. So I want to kind of end my remarks by saying that, one, there will be institutional resistance if Trump veers too far away from the foreign policy consensus that has developed over the last number of years. Two, I think that there is, in my view, going to be a reversion to the influence of traditional Republican foreign policy technocrats who, again, will have a moderating role. And over time, if his polling numbers are low, Mr. Trump, who, in my view, is not wedded to any particular ideology, but is a kind of a chameleon who was supporting the Clintons and was a Democrat 15 years ago, has not undergone any radical philosophical change that he ever expressed, simply chose to run as a Republican. I think that we will likely see him surrendering some of the more definitive and eccentric, in my view, and non-systemic views that he put forward, provided that his ratings do not show any improvement, or definitely, in my view, if they show further degradation. So again, the news for Ukraine would be relatively good, that there is a consensus in the U.S. foreign policy establishment that Russia is a threat, that Ukraine needs strong support. There is strong support in the Congress, strong support in, the editorial discourse and so on. And in my view, given the political weaknesses of Trump and of the extremist circle, which my friends will be speaking about, that has surrounded him in part, I believe there will be an erosion of their influence over time, and maybe not even over time. We already see a re-profiling of positions in the case of initially flirting around with discussions with Taiwan, moving the capital of the embassy from the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, in a little bit of backtracking on forcing the Mexicans to pay for the wall, and efforts at amelioration of some of these points, and then we see institutional pushback in the form of court rulings against the formulations of the exclusions to immigration and refugee status and travel from poor and small predominantly Islamic countries. So I'll end with that.
Hello. Thank you, Adrian. Adrian's a great friend and a great analyst, and we're all very lucky to be in the audience of him, to listen to his wisdom, and happy to be his friend and interlocutor. We did a similar panel in Russian yesterday. So I don't know if anyone in the audience was here yesterday, but I hope we'll say something different and build on a different conversation we were having yesterday. So one of the wonderful things about Adrian is that he's a very sober fellow, and he's a very he sees the best in people, and he perhaps unlike me, he thinks things are going to be all right, and he tried to calm you down. I'm going to give you a far less wholesome appraisal of the situation. I think things are quite bad, and even if technocratic elements of the Republican Party do come back into the mix, and of course President Trump is a radical chameleon, as Adrian said. He's a figure who has no ideology that we can, I mean, he had a couple of core views throughout his life, but for most part, he is a man who picks up on the, can everyone hear me? Yeah? Yeah. So for most part, he is a man who picks up on ideology in the air, and he wants people to be happy, and he wants to be liked, and he's a very needy, narcissistic, sociopathic character. So he picks up on what's in the air, and he gives it to his control group, which used to be businessmen, or it was the liberal New York intelligentsia, which never accepted him, despite the fact that he really wanted that acceptance. And now it's the Republican base and a subset of what used to be the Republican Party base, which is people in let's say the glubinka of the country who have been
WASP, he said WASP.
Well, then he's technically not a WASP. But WASP is White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. He's not those things technically. I think he's technically a Catholic, and though he doesn't know the first thing about religion whenever he goes into church, it's a great it's a great question. Who is he? What does he represent? And before we go into anything else and talk about how bad things are, it's a great question. Is he a WASP? No, the WASP establishment was it was Anglo-Saxon. It was Protestant. It was, let's say, Anglo-Scotch. It was responsible. He is Catholic. He's of German immigrant
He's an OSP. He's an Orange Saxon Protestant.
Yes. Yes. Yes, he's an OSP. Yes, bravo. Kind of Catholic, so it doesn't quite work. But he's not of that establishment. It's a filter to think about the world that doesn't really apply to him. What he is an opportunist who has taken advantage in systematic structural failures of the Republican Party, and he's gotten to power. That's what he is. So he throughout the years he had 2 or 3 core beliefs that we know that he believed in, even as far as the 80s, when he was taking out advertisements in the New York Times to talk about the fact that the United States is being taken advantage of. He's a man who has a very dark view of the world, and he sees the world as a very dark place where people are always battling for control of power and resources and fame, and everyone's always taking advantage of the United States. So in the 80s, he was taking out advertisements in the New York Times about the Japanese winning the trade wars. The Japanese are taking advantage of American industry. The Japanese are taking advantage of the American worker. The Japanese are exporting American jobs. We're losing ground to the Japanese. Soon enough, the Japanese will take over your company, and there's going to be a Japanese man running the show, and they're buying up all our real estate. So, you know, the Japanese threat collapses, and then in the 90s, he talks about the European threat to the American worker. Someone's always taking advantage. It's the Mexicans, it's the Chinese. The Chinese are taking advantage of us. So that was always a part of his philosophical thinking in the world, even though he's extremely unreflective, and he doesn't have philosophy, and he doesn't read very much, we know. So his philosophy... Well, it's well known that he never read the book that was ghostwritten for him. In fact, the ghostwriter is on record for saying that he never read his own books. He's completely illiterate. He's unreflective. He picks up on things in the air, and he's very good at being a salesman, and he's good at giving back to the person he's talking with what it is they want to hear. He reflects back at them. So this is very bad. Why is this bad? Because some of the people that he's brought into his administration have surrounded him with negative policy ideas. One especially that I want to talk about is Mr. Stephen Bannon. Everyone has heard of Mr. Bannon, right? So everyone's heard of Mr. Bannon. No one heard of Mr. Bannon until about 4 months ago outside of the United States. This gentleman, it's a loosely used term, is a representative of something called the alt-right, the alternative right. The alternative right, and it's a very complex historical discussion of what the alt-right is, because it's the newest in the latest fad of irrational movements, of revanchist reaction to the project of modernity, to the project of enlightenment. What Trump tapped into when he came into power was wide-scale resentment by 30, maybe 40% of a population to their being deracinated, to deindustrialization, to the culture changing very quickly, to the loss of cultural identity, to new sorts of people taking prestige levels in television. So identity politics. He's coming in at a time when identity politics, which is perfected by the left, has been for first time taken up by the right. Does everyone know what identity politics is? Yeah? These are complex things. I know this isn't everyone's first language, but identity politics is the idea that we should look at the world through a refraction of group identities. So we should be less racist, and we should be less racist, and we should be less misogynistic, which is of course a good thing. And we should try to get perspectives of people who are not typically or historically represented in mainstream political discourse. So the left flank of the Democratic Party has become very, very, very left-wing. Partly this is 8 years of President Obama in power. Partly this is structural issues. There are a lot of reasons for this happening, but a lot of conversations that were taking place in American politics have become quite heated and, some would say even histrionic. So you have a backlash in some ways to changing demographics. Whenever a country's demographics change quickly, people get upset, right? Not only is your factory job closing, so your factory job goes to Mexico or China or, let's say Ukraine, which is competitive now. Not only that, but you're less respected socially. And let's say you were a lower middle class or working class white man in a factory, you're no longer respected. Not only don't you have a job, your well-paying job with a factory where you have a union job but you're making $70,000 a year, you're doing something skilled and you're respected. Not only is that disappeared, but also your culture is changing very quickly. The things that you see on television, all sorts of things are changing very quickly. The proportion of white Americans demographic slice of a population is quickly shrinking, and people still understand this, and to a certain extent, that part of a population did not feel that it was represented by the mainstream of the Democratic and the Republican parties. So you have a lot of structural issues which come together in a time of globalization and a time of systematic imbalances of political life all over the world, and it's a scary place to be for a lot of people. A lot of people are scared. They don't know how to deal with globalization. They don't know how to deal with their factory job leaving. They don't know how to deal with new sorts of people living in their town. Maybe they're from Mexico, or maybe they're Indians, or maybe they're from Ukraine. Maybe they're Muslims. The society's changing very quickly. Not only is your job gone, but the society's changing quickly. So a lot of people flock to insurrectionary political ideologies. These political ideologies are very, very, very abrasive. They're aggressive, and they target the old elites. And the old elites and the mainline elites of the Democratic and Republican Party don't quite know what to do with this, because this is a new challenge. So you have a crisis in liberalism, and you have a crisis in capitalism, which as always go together. We're in the same place now that we were in the 30s in the Weimar Republic, where you have a liberal order and you have a Republican order, but it's very fragile and very weak, and you have people from the left and the right questioning what's going on here. Right? You have both the ultra-left and the ultra-right giving new answers to systematic problems. This is where Mr. Bannon and his cohorts come in. So I want to explain what he is, what he represents, and maybe we'll go into a little bit of intellectual history about what sort of ideas, subterranean ideas that he represents, that have always been in the lifeblood of Western political philosophy. So, ever since the French Revolution, in the 18th century, the Enlightenment ideas, the idea that with enough rational thinking, we can understand the world and understand how to run it and understand how to fix things. Science, positivism, progressive ideas about the way we should build a society, and a continuous stream of progress and democracy and living together, and all these nice liberal ideas. Ever since the French Revolution, there have been counter movements of nativist, locally rooted, irrationally based reactions to that. The first counter-Enlightenment thinkers are reactionaries of the Ancien regime in France, and then you have German Romanticism, right, which is closely linked to these movements of the great irrational forces of reaction, right? This is something that you get in German ideology, in German political philosophy. And these demodernizing forces are very suspicious of globalist elites. They're very suspicious of cosmopolitans. They're very suspicious of people like me and Adrian and Pieter, who know a lot of languages and have lived in Ukraine and have lived in Uzbekistan and have lived in France, or Ukrainian Americans, or me, a Russian Jewish American from Uzbekistan. A lot of people are very suspicious of globalist elites like that. So you have this turning inside towards inside one's socially understood core ideological sphere, and people like Stephen Bannon, I think he is a true believer, prey on these fears by giving people an alternative right-wing ideology. So the mainstream right-wing ideology that Adrian explained to you no longer applies. What people are into now is a combination, a collage of political ideologies which are taken from different places, but they are very reactionary. Some of it is quite racist. There's a huge racist component to it. Some of it is quite nativist. Some of it is reactionary in terms of religion. Some of it is reactionary in terms of a kind of Aristo-anarchism. So some of it has elements of IQ testing. elements, racist ideologies where the white race has higher IQs, and so they have to rule. So these are very disruptive ideas, and a man like Stephen Bannon creates a space, an ideological space, which is Breitbart, where he can deliver these ideas into the bloodstream of political conversation. I should maybe talk a little bit about what the alt-right is, right? So the alt-right starts out on the internet, and they start out on the dark corners, in the dark corners of Twitter and 4chan and these really reactionary internet chat rooms. And a lot of it is a reaction to women's liberation and women's growing role in the workplace and the narrowing of the income gap. But a lot of lower class men, or a lot of men in general, fear the collapse of the traditional hierarchical, patriarchal family structure. This is part of it. And I mean, there are lots of things. I mean, one can't do a taxonomy of the alt-right for the entire evening, but all this has endangered a backlash, right? There's been a backlash from the left to a backlash from the right. So what we're seeing now is mass mobilization on the left, and you're seeing the two sides of a political divide become ever more radicalized. So the left is becoming more radically left. You're starting to see return of anarchist black bloc type politics that we haven't seen since since the anti-World Trade Organization protests in 2000 and 2003. And on the right, you're starting to see kind of reversion to something which looks very much like neo-fascism. So it's a very dark time. I do believe that elements of what's called on the left the deep state, I know Adrian would never use that word in phraseology, the responsible people at the CIA and in the intelligence community, I do believe in the long term that they will get rid of all the, let's say, eccentric characters that Donald Trump has brought into the administration. But I do not see in the long term, or at least the medium term, a lessening of ideological extremes. I do see that both the left and the right will continue to destabilize the system. Bernie Sanders followers have not disappeared into the ether. There will be concerted attempts to create counter institutions to the centrist Democratic Party if the left cannot take over in the coming weeks and months. And you already seen elements of a sort of alternative right-wing political structures come into government. So it's a lot to explain in 10 minutes, and I hope it's not too jumbled, but my thesis is that things are only going to get much worse before they get better, and these systematic, structural questioning of liberal capitalism and liberal democracy, they happen every 50 years or every 100 years, and this is where we are now. Not so different in some ways from what was happening here 100 years ago exactly. In some ways, that should give us answers for the future, and in other ways, it should make us very, very afraid. So, sorry to be very depressing, but it's not a good time. Pieter?
Oh, gosh. What a wide range of views here from a somewhat upbeat, and I've known Adrian for several years, and usually Adrian errs on the side of optimism, and it's like a shot of heroin or a tranquilizer for me to listen to him, and I want to believe that there are certain checks and balances that are built in the system that are strong enough to withstand this onslaught of right-wing hysteria that we're facing. Alt-right, forget about right-wing, right? Right-wing is years out the door. We're talking about alt-right. And then on the other hand, you have Vlad, who's with another encyclopedic account of what's happening right now, an analysis, has provided a very gray, depressing account. And I think I gravitate closer towards Vlad's model, but I think I have of necessity to strike a pose that would be in between these two accounts. And I think I'll also I'd like to mention that Vlad was a bit modest, I think, in his presentation, and he was not introduced by his main title. And his main title currently is editor of this wonderful, wonderful edition. It's called the Odessa Review. I'm an avid reader of this beauty.
And a contributing writer.
And an occasional contributing writer. This is issue number 6. There are already issues number 7. Right, I think it's in the works. It's the first such magazine of a kind. It's called a Journal for the New Ukraine. It publishes monthly in English, and it's what would you call it? A lifestyle culture.
It's a journal. It's a journal of ideas and
a magazine of ideas. It's it talks, of course, a lot of it is dedicated to Odessa, but also the country at large. And so I would like to encourage you to pick up a few copies. Vlad so graciously brought a few with him today, so you will be.
I brought about 10 copies. If someone wants, thank you, Pieter. But talk about politics, not this review.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just filling up space here because I think that a lot of ground has been covered, and I think I can choose to talk about some of my very personal and gut feelings about what has occurred since November 9th. November 9th, on the morning of that day, I was on a talk show with Yevgeny Kisilov on News 1, and it was in the morning. We were supposed to be commenting the results in real time, live. And as I was getting ready in my apartment, as I was shaving, getting ready, already I saw there was this uh-oh moment with the results coming in from Florida, and Michigan was coming up, Wisconsin. It was not looking good. By the time I arrived, there was Kisilov, there was Oleg Voloshin on my sides, and they were just chattering away, commenting. I had nothing to say. I was in shock. This President Trump, for our times, I think, as a diagnosis. That's really all you need to know. President Trump, something that was, for many years in America, it was a long-running joke, was never taken seriously. And Donald Trump has flirted with the idea of presidency going back to, I think, the late 80s. And that occurred. And so what is one to make of it? What is one to make of it? As we see the last 3 weeks into his presidency, the great hope that his entourage, Congress, observers at large had about the presidency is that he would be straitjacketed into a normalcy, a sense of normalcy, once he has assumed, the highest office in the land. And you know what? Donald Trump has remained Donald Trump. Pretty much, just to name a few of the scandals, and I think they come thick and fast. Now I think it's 1 or 2 a day that we have been witnessing. He had a conversation with the Mexican president, and after which he canceled a planned summit with him. During his phone conversation with the Prime Minister of Australia, mind you, America's most steadfast, all-time steadfast ally, which took part in every single one of America's wars, he hung up the phone. He was comparing Chancellor of Germany, Merkel, with Vladimir Putin, as if to say that he would be withholding his judgment on either one. Mind you, Germany as the main ally of America in Europe, continental ally in Europe. He conducted or ordered a failed raid in Yemen, after which the government of Yemen banned all military personnel from America from operating on its territory. And he keeps talking about millions of votes that were stolen from him. And in fact went as far as to say that he would commission an investigation into allegations of these millions of, or as he says, facts of these millions of votes that went missing. And of course, his minions have been dispatched to purvey these alternative, so-called alternative facts, giving rise to all sorts of memes for our day, such as alternative facts and others. He has engaged in a warfare with mass media, with foreign services, with the company Nordstrom. It's a supermarket chain. It's a high-end chain of stores that has decided to discontinue selling the clothing line of his favorite daughter, Ivanka. Mind you, that's the President of the United States engaging in Twitter war with a private company. As Adrian already mentioned, that there's kind of a conflict as well with some of the promises he made during the election campaign, where he promised to move the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, where he promised to lift sanctions on Russia, where he said that he would go after these NATO members that do not carry their fair share of burden and make them pay for it, including Japan and Korea. He actually intimated he would be willing to reconsider the one nation China policy, saying that in a conversation with the Prime Minister of Taiwan that he might consider, in fact, instituting full-blown diplomatic relations with Taiwan. But on the other hand, he has pretty much backtracked on every single one of these promises. As you know, he recently met with the Prime Minister of Japan, upholding this relationship as a major security relationship the United States has in Asia. He has obviously had to walk back on his promise of lifting sanctions on Russia for very obvious reasons, the scandals with General Flynn and continuing suspicions that other members of the Trump team, including the president himself, have interests with Russia or have certain very damaging facts of relationship with Russia that have influenced the policy there. I think at this point, the one thing you can say with reasonable clarity about the current administration and Trump and his policies is that the only thing that you can predict about Trump is his unpredictability. And I'm a little coarse, I'm sorry, and I'm a little tired. I requested this cup of coffee here. I've been talking nonstop. I've been engaged in a marathon, just like my colleagues here on Ukrainian mass media, trying to answer the question, what is Trump? Where is he going? What is he about? And what do his policies or his worldview portend for the country of Ukraine? And I think of necessity, my friends and my colleagues would, I hope, agree with me that at least some of what we say, or a lot of what we say, has to be taken with a grain of salt. I think to be completely honest is to say that we really don't know. We really don't know, and therefore we have to point at at some traditional policies. We have to point at our system of checks and balances, which we hope will withstand, as I said, this onslaught of barbarians that are knocking at our democracy's gate. Once again, to return to some of the only things we can say with clarity right now, I think that it is clear that this White House administration is dysfunctional. And it is also clear that the sanctions against Russia will not be lifted anytime soon. If anything, this is a face-saving measure. Adrian mentioned, as something I mentioned earlier today on Hromadske Radio, that it is not out of the realm of the possible that he will pull out an ace, a tuz, out of his deck of cards and, in fact, decide to provide Ukraine with lethal weapons. Something is required of that kind of magnitude to try to stanch this flow of negativity that is, and a scandal that does not show signs of abating. Already members of Congress, including, and I'm speaking primarily about Republican stalwarts of Cold War, such as Senator Graham, Senator McCain, they are, in fact, preparing for hearings in both chambers of the U.S. Congress. And in fact, the FBI has intimated that there's more to the story of General Flynn. In fact, if General Flynn lied to the FBI agents that that means that he may be facing criminal prosecution. And the FBI has also said that they're investigating other members of the Trump team, names that you've heard, Carter Page and Roger Stone, possibly Paul Manafort, whom you all know, former chairman of Trump's Yanukovych's and Trump's campaigns. And already you can see that, you know, the Russians' champagne that they uncorked and were drinking to celebrate Trump's victory has been losing some of its bubbles, right? It's been going flat. Already today, a TV channel, Rain, Dozhd, reported that the Kremlin has in fact sent a directive to mass media to stop praising Donald Trump excessively. And this was reported by Dozhd and some other American mass media. So this is to say that maybe the public is being prepared for something altogether different than the initial very, very rosy expectations from Donald Trump. So I would just say that, yes, the world has indeed changed. And I think whatever Donald Trump preached during his campaign, that he is the cure to this to the ailment that's plaguing the world, I think it's a case where the cure is worse than the disease. Maybe, or the cure will cure the disease, but the patient will die. President Trump is a diagnosis of our time. Those two words. The more we talk about him, the less we understand. In fact, just recently, a group of psychiatrists from the Johns Hopkins University and others have taken a very radical step to diagnose a patient at a distance, which is actually the policy not to do. They actually made that step and came up with a diagnosis of malignant narcissism against Donald Trump. And those of us who know him well, I had an opportunity to meet Donald Trump in an elevator in this Trump Tower in the year 2007 when I was a student at Columbia University. We traveled all the way up to floor 38 where my Azerbaijani friend had an apartment. Well, his father was a vice president of Lukoil, so as a student he could afford an apartment in Donald Trump's tower. So I observed this guy from up close, very close. And you know, there's really nothing there other than what you see. And this is what Vlad touched on, and this is what we have observed to our great consternation, that Donald Trump has remained Donald Trump, and it portends very troubling times ahead. I think that I will part ways with Adrian when it comes to his optimistic message, and but on the other hand, we'll agree that the only salvation America will have is that if the checks and balances kick in and the guy is impeached, because he will not change. As we say in Russian, Горбатова могила исправит. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. First of all, before we continue our discussion, I would like to stress that our present meeting is possible because due to partnership with the Ukrainian Institute of Future. Unfortunately, Taras Borozovets from this institute wanted, planned, but cannot be today with us. But we hope to see him during our...
His future, but this institute predicts your future.
So he thinks globally, first of all.
Maybe we'll keep talking. You'll show up. Let's see.
So next, our part is very important. Is we want to hear what exactly you are interested in. So please raise your hands and please take mic because everybody needs to hear you.
You inspired me, bro. You're welcome. You inspire me every day.
Thank you very much for those first words and first explanations. But even speaking, almost all three said, that Trump is non-systematic. His characteristics were mentioned. Mm-hmm. But don't you think that your analysis were mostly based on his rhetorics of pre-campaign or election campaign? And now we have this position when administration started to work. With those balances, of course, and Congress, of course, but in administration, he could change his position, or system could change his position. Already his nominee started to make declaration about a strong vision or strong position towards Russia. we expected that in München will be some other declarations or strong words or some exposition of real politics from America. So could you probably think about beyond this moment for the future or nearest future? What could we expect from the administration and probably from the team of Donald Trump? Tillerson, rather strong figure, Mattis, rather strong figure, and all others could be, and by the way, a lot of others are in connections with the Republican Party machine. So he could be non-systematic, but his surroundings, entourage, is quite system people. And we could expect some serious steps from them. Thanks.
So I fundamentally, my presentation agreed, leaned in your direction. However, I want to lean a little bit in the direction of my colleagues and say today there is one bit of worrying news in that Mr. Trump is now taking on again the intelligence community of the United States. Yeah. He announced that one of his circle's loyalists will be in charge of a review of the effectiveness of the intelligence services and of their, quote, politicized role. So it shows that there is a bit of pushback in terms of this circle of radicals that is around him. And where I would say that the problem is not that the system won't, in the end, constrain him, maybe in a very difficult way, or that he won't bend to the system, but that in his personal characteristic of resistance and of stubbornness and of excessive self-confidence in the absence of a well-formed worldview, he falls prey to the influences of people like Bannon. He then refuses to backtrack and bears resentments. I mean, his constant attacks on the media and his declaration that the media are doctoring news and producing false news is really quite asystemic. It is fed by these darker forces around him. So where I would lean in their direction is that if he persists, he will eventually be broken by the system, but for many months he will create uncertainty in policy formation, chaos with resignations of serious people who cannot advance their work without being pushed back or contradicted. So we may face a period of chaos and uncertainty, and that, frankly, more than a pro-Russian sentiment was one of the reasons that I think Mr. Putin wanted Trump to win. Not only because he, quote, feared Hillary Clinton, but because I think he thought there was an element of uncertainty and chaos that would be injected. This is why he wants non-systemic people like Marine Le Pen to win. And if Marine Le Pen were to win the presidency, she would create the same system of cohabitation because she is not from that political establishment. She would not control the legislature. And there would be these internal tensions, systemic tensions, which weaken not just cohesiveness of the West, but which weaken institutional cohesiveness inside the democracies and may lead to further polarization, radicalization, and uncertain developments. So, although I fundamentally think that he will bend in the end because as a narcissist, he cannot suffer endless erosion of his support without affirmation. And secondly, I think he is politically lazy. Mr. Bannon may not be politically lazy, but Mr. Trump has not made efforts to create a political movement. He created a campaign around certain slogans, but he has not worked in the traditional, I would say, fascist or neo-fascist. No. I mean, I don't believe he is a fascist, but I believe there are people around him who may lean
elements of neo-fascist ideology,
who are not hostile to some of the elements of fascism, and we certainly would understand that building a mass movement is important. Now, he may at some point try to build that kind of mass movement to make America great again, but in the absence of that deliberate, systematic work, I think it'll be a softer landing, but I do think that if he resists and if he creates these kinds of new challenges where he, just 2 weeks ago, he went to the CIA and delivered a talk about why he accepted the view that there was Russian meddling in the election, although he said it was not in his behalf and it did not affect the outcome. He accepted it. Today, he seems to be backtracking yet again with a new attack on the intelligence services, blaming them for the resignation, the forced resignation of Michael Flynn, and now launching a new pushback against the politicized intelligence services. So I think this is very potentially destabilizing to the country if he doesn't desist, and that, I think, is the greater danger than the danger of some, radical consolidation within the state.
Quickly to chime in with what Adrian said, and I wholeheartedly agree with every single word. I think that it's important to mention that from the outset, I think the Russians, the Kremlin, as it was meddling with the American elections, was never really expecting Trump to win. Trump was a chaos candidate that would create chaos, that would cast a pall on Hillary Clinton, whom Putin, for his reasons, considered an arch enemy or an adversary. So this was a way to torpedo the American democracy, to plant the seed of doubt in the integrity of our institutions, including the institution of our election. And I think the way Trump has really played out, his policies have played out. The fact that he has unleashed a war, not against the Democrats, but I think they picked a different adversary, and that is the media, mass media, the so-called fake news. It's fake news. CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, and that that is very and that finds an echo, or it is an echo, in fact, of the hybrid informational warfare that we have seen Kremlin perpetrate against Ukraine and against Western European democracies. Donald Trump is a person who has for many years been very flexible with this thing as facts. He has now come up with a new term and a new meme of alternative facts, and in that fashion, I think we find echoes both with what Putin is doing in Ukraine and other European countries, and with what Trump is trying to do in Washington.
Thank you, Pieter. Let's just talk about what he's actually doing. The gentleman is absolutely right that he was willing to say anything to get into power, and immediately after he said some of those things and he took power, he just ignored lots of the pre-election rhetoric, lots of pre-election campaign promises. We thought that he would ignore a lot more of them. We thought that the wall would just be an idea that would just be forgotten as soon as he came to power, in the same way that he was railing against the Goldman Sachs bankers in the pre-election campaign, right? Kept saying Goldman Sachs bankers, and as soon as he took power, he put in 6 Goldman Sachs bankers into his cabinet. So we thought a lot of it would be like that. He's actually surprising us by keeping or making attempts to keep more of his campaign promises than we thought. That said, he's been in power now, what, 6 weeks? Actually, it's been a month exactly, right? It's been a month. It's on the 20th, it'll be a month exactly. So let's say it's been 3 weeks, a month, right? Every day there's a scandal. And most of those scandals are, let's say, self-generated. His transition was catastrophically inefficient. This is a man who comes to power saying, I'm a businessman, I'm effective, I'm a good leader, I'm good at making money, I'm going to bring order to the federal government, I'm going to run the federal government as if it is my corporation. He comes to power and it's a complete bardak. They've only put 1/3. They're still doing transition stuff. There's a reason why in American politics the transition is as long as it is. The federal government, the federal bureaucracy is huge. Millions of people work for the federal bureaucracy, and a lot of it is continuity issues, and a lot of it is people that you have to brief their forthcoming replacement with a lot of very complex information. They've in the first month not put in more than 1/3 of the ZOMs, the deputy heads of administrations. There's about 650 or 648 of them. So about 20 cabinet positions, and those 20 cabinet positions have 650 undersecretaries. Those undersecretaries are the ones that actually get the job done. They've only put in about 250 of them. Part of that is because as we've said before, this was not a political movement. This was just a crazy guy who got into power because of systematic failures of all of our institutions and collapse of norms. He did not, right? He didn't have a political party. He didn't have a movement. He didn't have people waiting in the wings to take political appointee jobs. He didn't, he's giving out ambassadorships to his friends, which is easy, but he doesn't even have enough friends to give away all 200 ambassadorships to, right? No one does. No one has 850 friends that you could put into, make undersecretaries of all the institutions.
Or Facebook friends, maybe.
Maybe Facebook friends, right? But, yeah, there's not enough people who came in with him. This is why all these crazy guys and ladies who were sticking with him from the beginning of the campaign got plum appointments to the cabinet. Stephen Bannon would not be anyone's first choice to be on the NCC in any sort of normal cabinet. So these people are incompetent. If you look at their actual actions, let's not look at rhetoric, let's not look at political infighting, let's not look at the battle between the intelligence agencies and the administration. What have they been doing? They've been spinning mostly, and they've been issuing badly spelled executive orders. I mean, most of the executive orders that they issued had to be rechecked for grammatical mistakes and wording, right, before they were signed into law. I think like 5 of them, there were major changes in between what the president proposed and what was signed, a day or 2 later. These executive orders have the status of law, and they're not well thought through. They're not having a broad range of aides, and political people look at stuff like the immigration order, right? That's very complicated. You need to have the heads of multiple departments go through them so that they work together. That's military stuff, you have homeland security stuff, there's execution stuff. Hundreds of thousands of people are required to execute these orders. It's very complicated things that require the cooperation, cohesion of a federal bureaucracy. These are not things that 6 or 7 White House aides can put together, because a lot of it's very technical. It requires technical knowledge. So their executive orders have been badly thought through, badly spelled, badly executed, and this has created backlash to them. Mattis had to intervene on behalf of Iraqi warplane pilots and translators who were working for the American government structures in Iraq in order for them to be allowed into the country so they could be trained at our military institutions. This is a badly working government. They're incompetent. We have reports of leaks constantly coming through because of internal hatred of the career staff officers in the White House and the national security apparatus against him. We know for a fact that there's infighting. We know for a fact that there is professional unhappiness, and this is because they're incompetent. So, Adrian, back me up on that.
So thank you very much. So as we don't have so much time, I would like to ask you in your questions to be pretty short. And so for that reason, we must have a plan. I propose the following plan. First, we have 2 questions from the first rows, this gentleman, and after that, Ambassador Turansky. Then Victoria was asking for the question, and gentleman to my left. So, and later we will see.
Thank you very much for interesting presentation, rather emotional. My name is Maxim Yali, Senior Research Fellow, Institute of World History, National Academy of Sciences. So, I guess, Peter, I would like to ask you some details about Roger Stone, yeah? He participated in campaign, but what is his role now? Is he still in team of Trump, though he doesn't have any official position? And Adrian, the quietest, I would say, person here. From your point of view, this investigation, I mean, ties of aides of Trump with Russia during campaign still going on, and as CNN reported, yes, some sources say that some meetings, some calls were confirmed by intelligence. Yeah, what are the perspectives of this issue? Yeah, and if there will be more proofs, which consequences can be, and from your point of view, what are real perspectives of impeachment, taking into account that the Congress is Republican, yeah, and they will oppose it. From my point of view, so what level of the scandals and which event can lead to real impeachment? Thank you.
I'll just start.
You can take two questions.
Two questions, sure.
So maybe we'll have the second one question as well, and
well,
other speakers will try to answer all of them.
Thank you very much. For me, it was very interesting to listen your comments, your presentations, because you know that in Ukraine there are a lot of correspondence information agency which do not have their representatives abroad. They rely on information provided by BBC, Associated Press, and many others. So maybe I hope that you have a lot of additional information which we do not have here in Ukraine. From the second part of view, due to the communist ideology, only Lenin could see what is closed by the time. We have in Ukraine about 40-50 agencies, public organizations, who tried, I would like to stress that they wanted to try to analyze the international policy of Ukraine and international policy of many other countries located in Europe and all over the world. And if you can read or can you find some of the predictions or forecasts made 6 months ago, you can come to the conclusion that 99.99% never realized or never came to the truth. At least two examples: elections of the president in Poland and election of the president of United States. Who could predict the situation with the National Security Advisor of the United States? From my point of view, 1 month and even less than 1 month when Mr. Trump is in his office, it is too short time in order to make any conclusions. But my questions to all of our speakers: what do you think? The new world in which we are coming, if I can say so, will be more peaceful, will be more dangerous from Ukraine and for all countries of modern world? Thank you.
No, I'll just answer briefly your question about Roger Stone. I observed Roger Stone. He was a very prominent interlocutor for Trump, a minion early on during the campaign. He was on CNN all the time, and he's a pretty eloquent fellow, but he's known for his Russia's sympathies for Russia, for Putin, and his connections. And yes, there's something to be said about, or to be questioned about, whether these contacts have continued. He does not hold an official position in the administration, but we can only surmise that there's still some links there. Same thing with Paul Manafort, who's being investigated. He's being investigated by the FBI. Same thing with Paul Manafort, who had to leave his position as chairman of the campaign in disgrace, and yet he's known to be living in Trump Tower. And so it's safe to assume that there's continuing communication. But with the scandal with General Flynn, I think that it will be incumbent on the administration to try to distance themselves from these characters. In fact, if they are under an FBI investigation, then I think it will be borderline illegal for them to be in cahoots.
So on the issue of investigations and impeachment. Of course, one of the things that we learned is that this is a government that listens whenever there are cross-border or interactions outside of simply discourse between citizens, and even if there is not citizens of a hostile power or representatives of a hostile power, of at least a non-friendly power, maybe even a friendly powers, that there is very substantial U.S. Intelligence gathering of those conversations. The main issue which has always brought down or created impeachments has rarely been the misbehavior itself, but the attempt to cover up the misbehavior. President Clinton's short, brief troubles of a passionate nature became a political problem because of dissimulation in answering investigative questions. The Watergate scandal could have been contained early, but it was a cover-up in which there was also the engagement of the president. So if there is, and relentless communication, investigation, et cetera, of what has happened, if there has been some miscommunication to the investigative agencies, and I don't know whether the president has already been deposed or some of his closest aides and what they may have said, but basically, if there is some contradiction and someone is on the record in an investigation of wrongdoing, that itself becomes an impeachable offense. And I would say that while, impeachments are a matter of where there is always a bit of partisanship, again, my thesis is that the Republican Party does not at the moment regard Donald Trump as a leader of the traditional sort of Republican Party. I do believe they regard him as someone who potentially will be an ally of their agenda and who may shape the Republican Party, but I think they would prefer to shape him. And so I don't think there will be the same kind of solidarity among Republicans, not to speak of, it's a very difficult thing to get a majority of the 48 Democrats to vote impeachment. It's a huge thing to begin a trial, for the Congress to vote an impeachment and then to have that impeachment be tried in the Senate, where there are already a majority that are hostile to the president, with the 48 Republicans and at least 3 or 4 very sharp critics. So I think if it ever came to an impeachment and then to a trial in the Senate, he would not be in a very strong position. And I don't believe it would be a specific act of his wrongdoing other than perhaps lying in the course of an investigation or a deposition, or being shown to have encouraged people to not speak forthrightly or to have suborned the process of the investigation. That's the greatest danger to Trump. And there was an article 2 days ago on Bloomberg by a very important sort of foreign policy and international affairs analyst who referred to what was going on, that the resignation of General Flynn was an appetizer, and that Trump himself is the main course. So I think, I'm not predicting this, but what I'm saying is if something happens along the track of impeachment, it will be somewhere around the issue of not being forthright or lying in the pursuit of some kind of a major investigation, lying to the FBI or to some other intelligence agency that's gathering information. On predicting a turbulent future, Ukraine has a turbulent present, so to predict a turbulent future is easy because Ukraine is in the middle of a turbulent, invasion, carving up of its territory, occupation, military threats, Russia deploying short-range nuclear missiles as a test of, I guess, wills or of a new policy. So there are a lot of dangers, and the main danger, I would say, is, again, if there is not a righting of the ship of state, if the various institutions cannot quickly compel Trump, or Trump by his good reason withdraw from his narcissistic wars with good sense, we will have a bit of a chaotic period of the main regulator of the world system for a while, and that could create unpredictable moments. And I'm not going to suggest that this is the beginning of a period of chaos, but I do think that turbulence in the U.S. Political process is not healthy for the stability of the world.
Should we take some more questions? Because I think we've answered those. Is there anyone else?
So first Victoria, then a lady in the second row.
Yeah.
We take two people for questions.
Good evening, gentlemen. Victoria Vdovichenko, Senior Teaching Fellow. Thank you very much for a great appetizer and the main course for the reflections. So I'll have one reflections and kind of one philosophical and one practical questions, if you may. All of you were talking about kind of the syndromes of illness, which is called fear. We are fearing on every level. So we are fearing of the communication, miscommunication, misunderstanding, misperceptions. But it's a syndrome of what I call a systematic changes that even Wallerstein was telling us about. Like I'm referring to Vlad's social liberalism changing and transformation system. I call it transformation, not ruins, but the transformation.
Transformation, the world systems theory, Wallerstein.
Absolutely, it's for the Wallerstein. So he was talking about that, that the global inequality leads to that. I think you are kind of aware. And he was talking about the presence of the realpolitik periods. So when the social liberalism doesn't work, so the realpolitik comes to the. And I think something we are obviously seeing now, it's the realpolitik. But a bit in a blended form of it. So my question is actually we like to polarize a lot. We would like looking for a good man and for a bad man, for a white swan and for a black swan. So you are talking about the black swan. My question whether we should look for a white swan in a theory or not. So that was a philosophical a bit, yeah. And the second one is a bit practical question. As far as we're stating that we are living in a global but digital world, and this world becomes blended from the realistic and virtual space. So my question will be, what about cyber effects of what we have now? I will be, of course, referring to some of the cyber attacks the United States had in 2010 with the company were related to the critical infrastructure. Because what I think the nearest reality is that we're going to have this blended small critical attacks worldwide. And referring to what Peter was telling about Trump's comments on Australian premier's effects, Angela Merkel, still we had Netanyahu just visiting Trump. Fortunately, no bad comments for a moment about the official visit, so I hope maybe it's a good start and a good starting point to talk about also Israel's policy and U.S. policy. Thank you.
Can I answer and then you do the cyber time? So
So maybe we will listen to the second question, to have two.
Sure.
So, good evening. My name is Anne, and I'm going to be extremely short-spoken. So, would you please comment upon meeting of Trudeau and Donald Trump held on Monday, and give some assumptions about NAFTA future? Thank you.
Okay, so I think we should divide those questions. I would like to talk about Israel and then also to answer your questions at Wallerstein, and maybe Peter and Adrian will divide their questions about cyber war and Trudeau, just so we all have something to say. Very quick answer first. The easiest thing, which is the Israeli question. So that was a very positive. Trip for President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Prime Ministerial system, because it was touted that that the president's son, son-in-law, who's an Orthodox Jew, would be the man who would create good relations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And in fact, that was a positive trip for Netanyahu in that he got the traditional peacekeeper commitments of the United States repealed. This is a radical change of direction for the United States in the Middle East. This is a realignment of Middle East policy. This is one example where Bannon and Kushner have completely diverging interests, and where the interests of Mr. Kushner and his community are prevailing. So this was actually very bad in the sense of peace in the Middle East, because United States is traditionally taken to be kind of an honest broker. It can no longer claim to be an honest broker in a situation where the President of the United States says outright, we're no longer committed to a two-state solution. That was a big coup for Netanyahu, and it's bad for peace. To your very intelligent questions about Manuel Wallerstein, yeah, I'm very much. I come out of a social democratic leftist tradition, unlike I don't know, my friends here. Maybe they're not as much as me. I very much subscribe to the theory that maybe 60% of everything that happened came out of rampant inequality in the United States. Income inequalities are as bad as they've been in maybe 100 years. Income inequality has led to polarization and a revolt of the masses in the traditional sense. I'm in this sense a neo-Marxist. Class does explain a lot, in the sense we are in the middle of a classical Marxist transformation of the world system, and we're going to see a lot more class warfare in the future. And of course, part of President Trump's base are in the thralls of classical case of false consciousness. So there we go. I'm with Emanuel Wallerstein and the neo-Marxist. Pieter, Adrian?
So I take your interest in large historical cycles seriously, but I don't take seriously the idea that the elements of how Mr. Trump is formulating his foreign policy is a reflection of the influence of the realpolitik wing of the Republican Party. One might have thought that maybe half a year ago when he gave a talk at the Center for the National Interest, and when he was getting a bit of support from those circles. But I think that many people in the, even in the realpolitik world, do not share this missionary idea that ISIS is the existential threat to the United States. I mean, I think that it has an element of ideology in it, and it has an element that is very divorced from a kind of a realpolitik reaction to ambitious transformational social projects. There may be a conservatism in U.S. external policy that will emerge in the coming months not to engage too much in the transformation of other societies, and we may see a different priority list for USAID programs or for things like the National Endowment for Democracy and so on that reflects this more of an influence of the realpolitik community. But on the other hand, you've got a guy like Bannon who believes that there is a 1,000-year civilizational war between Islam and Western civilization, which has now been joined by secularism. I don't think this is, this is the element of that kind of a realpolitik reaction. As to NAFTA, I think that the Republican Congress will not allow for the the dismantling of trade agreements, and any modification that Trump would like to impose will likely be shaped by the Republicans and Democrats in a way where only modest realignments or modest adjustments are made, maybe with some agreement by the Mexican side. As to Trudeau, I think they're just happy that you know, oil will be flowing along pipelines. And it was proven that not everyone can be pushed around by Trump's handshake because.
And that he's not building a wall in Canada.
Not yet, yes.
I'd just like to add very quickly, I think that meeting was a study in contrast. You have Donald Trump and Trudeau, right? Among other things, the physical attributes, Trudeau is a welcoming and a paragon of Western, right, inclusive democracy who has welcomed, by contrast, immigrants from these poor Muslim countries such as Syria with untold amounts of misery there. But I think Canada is very concerned, and Trudeau is very concerned that this alt-right kind of effect, this populist wave will reach Canada as well. Already we see it in this terror act in Quebec, where a lone white supremacist attacked a Muslim center there, and by the way, Trump neglected to mention it, that fact, and that's very interesting and telling. But I think that Canada so far has kind of remained safe from this, but there are already signs that this alt-right, this rabid right ideology, populism is raising its ugly head in Canada as well. So I think it's very troubling times for our northern neighbor.
Unfortunately, we have very limited time, and our meeting should be over now, as our guests have already next commitment. And at the very end of our meeting, as we were mostly discussing very sad things, and majority of our audience are young people, we are always have such a tradition to ask our guests a message to inspire. So something you believe, yeah. So, you know, we don't want to hear about general things, but we want to hear what do you believe is important for your personal life, for success, your personal success, how do you see it, and maybe professional. So, just a few words.
So I would say the only thing is stick to it. If you believe in a particular career path, you will eventually find your way there. If you have the capacity, the ability to continue earning a bit of an income, even if it's a not terribly pleasing job or opportunity. If you are deeply interested in something, continue with it, and you will eventually prosper.
Well, I'll just say that I'm already very gratified to see this response. I see very curious faces and people who speak wonderful English. Continue to engage, continue to resist, speak up for your rights, speak up for your worldview, and remember that razum nas bahat.
Well, this is a study in platitudes. So, I mean, just read a lot. Very helpful. It's been helpful to me in my life. I read a lot of books. And then, no, don't be optimistic. That's nonsense. Things are very bad. And
I read the wrong books.
no, don't be like being up. No, that's not good advice. You should always look for the dark side and try to avoid that, and look for the worst in people, and be prepared, and no, don't be optimistic. This is I'm not so American yet that I should tell you to be.
I think you're trying to say there's a black lining behind every silver lining.
Yeah. Yeah, no, just read a lot of books. That's my advice to the young.
And
So
there's a review. He's again
yeah.
too modest.
So let's thank our guests for this evening. And I believe you will follow our guests on media and social media, and I hope you will follow Open Ukraine Foundation on Facebook as well for our next event. See you next time.